welcome to a much belated part 2 of the Within Temptation double backtracking episodes, and we're just going to kick things off with the band's 5th album, titled The Unforgiving. Released in 2011, it would be produced by Daniel Gibson and Stefan Helleblad yet again, and it was released via Dragnet/Sony in Europe and Roadrunner in the United States and Japan. Also, the band didn't technically have a drummer at this point, so a guy named Nick Hellenberg actually took care of that as a session musician for this album. Anyway, after the Heart of Everything took the band's heights to new levels, they took a year off and released an acoustic live album in 2009. I feel like that year off was to focus more on this album's concept, as it does have one, which I'll get more into later. We start with the track titled Why Not Me, which is just a 30-second narration thing, so instead we'll talk about the next song after that, called Shot in the Dark. And you know what? Hell yeah, this is a good concept. The band promoted it by releasing comic books and short films to coincide with the album's singles, the best example being Sinead, and even the cover has a comic book-like quality to it. The concept seems to revolve around a woman named Sinead in a dystopian world trying to escape her past and do some good in that said world. I like it when a band goes to other forms of media to promote an album with a story because it really makes it a bit more believable and likeable, sort of like what Stone Sour did when they released their House of Golden Bones. The album's structure mixes the band's usual symphonic metal with a bit more hard rock this time, lending a movie soundtrack sort of feel to it, and the usage of orchestral and choir elements help a lot with that as well. My favourite song goes to Sinead. You know, this album might not have had the best response from critics, but I love this kind of stuff personally. It's performed and produced well, it's got a great core story and structure, and really good dark lyrical themes. All of this gets a yes from me personally. I just really enjoyed this when I listened to it. It might be my favourite album by the band, if I'm being completely honest. Next is the band's 6th album, Hydra. Released in 2014, it came out through about 5 different record labels, including the band's own self-titled label, and it was produced solely by Daniel Gibson this time around, as Stefan Helleblad would move from being a producer to the band's 3rd guitarist. And the album also has a new drummer named Mike Coulin, who is still with the band today, so good stuff there too. This album is also the first to have longtime guitarist Robert Westerholt as a studio musician, and the first to have him using heavier vocals since the band's debut album. Speaking of albums, this album starts with a song titled Let Us Burn, which is pretty standard within Temptation's symphonic metal fare, and then it gets weird. See, this album has 4 guest stars, those being Howard Jones, formerly of Killswitch Engage, rapper Exhibit, Tarja from Nightwish, and Dave Perner of Soul Asylum on the tracks Dangerous, And We Run, Paradise in brackets What About Us, and the closing track The Whole World Is Watching, respectively. I know that I usually spend the first chunk of a paragraph talking about what the band did up until this point, but all that it was trying to experiment, with the goal being that each guest vocalist would make the song that they're in sound a bit different. But boy oh boy did they ever miss that mark. It just feels like the guest stars were there to perform on a With Them Temptation song, which is maybe why Tarja is the best of the guest stars, as she's the only one who actually doesn't really feel out of place. Beyond that, and beyond the claims of experimentation, there's not a lot changed despite the band's best efforts. The production is still clean, but without a concept to it, it just feels like any other album of this style, in terms of instruments and lyrics both. It does still have some flashes here and there though, and the band still sound as good as they can manage. My favourite song goes to Silver Moonlight. Hydra does have good intentions, but with uninspired guest spots except Tarja, she was really good, and a familiar feel to it, it doesn't really push the boundaries quite like their previous releases did, and this one actually tried to do that, so yeah, it just winds up a bit underwhelming. And finally, we reach the band's 7th album, Resist. Released in 2019 through Vertigo and Spinefarm Records, it would be produced by Daniel Gibson and Mathis Tekken, and it also features some guest stars. Jacoby Shaddix of Pop Roach appears on the opening track The Reckoning, and Anders Frieden of In Flames and Jesper Stevelink of Arid appear on the songs Radio Banner and Firelight respectively. So this was my first full Within Temptation album, before writing for this episode anyway, and as most people will recall when I reviewed this album last year, I wasn't too keen on it back then. And you know what, I can safely say, listening to it again for this episode, that hasn't changed at all. The album's starting track is a good sign of that, and not just because Jacoby's guest spot doesn't feel natural, but to be fair, that could be said about almost all of the guest stars here. Papa Roach and In Flames both put out 2 of 2019's most meh albums, and Arid haven't put out a new album in a decade now, so it's just very odd that they're even here. The album's structuring is also far from perfect, in that it's the band's shortest album, but it still somehow feels really dragged out. And good Christ, what the fuck happened on the production end of this one? It feels so overbearing and it doesn't mix in the newer pop and electronic elements all well at all. The instrumental work feels so much like Old Ground 2, with the same stuff here and there, and the symphonic elements are so overtaken by the new stuff that they barely exist on this album. And even lyrically, it's just so boring. I think that the band wanted to try and tackle a new concept like they did on The Unforgiving, but without the sense of fun that that album had, or, any creativity, or, originality. Or I should stop and move on. Now you guys know that usually I don't mind it when a band experiments, and these guys worked their asses off up until this point, but when you've reached your peak, there's not a lot of other places where you can really go that don't result in you falling down a hole. Having said that, I do still have a favourite song on this album, and that song is called Holy Ground. Resist tries way too much to try shit that just doesn't work. The band aren't enjoying themselves, or at least it doesn't sound like it to me, and the production is just extremely shoddy, So, despite the fact that we ended on quite the sour note, that is Within Temptation done and dusted. I hope that you all enjoyed it, and as always, if you want to like, comment, subscribe and all that bollocks, then feel free to. I'm not going to force you, it's up to you, honestly, it really is. In the next episode, I'll be covering London, Ontario's own Kitty. Yeah. But Kittie, not Kitty. Until that episode, though, as always, thank you for watching. You're awesome. Bye bye.